Hello and welcome. Today we're diving headfirst into a topic that's about as comfortable as a wool burqa in a sauna. Countries where being Muslim in 2024 feels about as welcome as a fart in a spacesuit. Now, you might be thinking, John, isn't that a bit dramatic? And to that I say, have you looked at a map lately? Because there are countries out there that seem to have missed the memo about that whole love thy neighbour thing. In fact, some of them seem to have replaced it with suspect thy neighbour, especially if they pray 5 times a day. We're talking about places where simply existing as a Muslim can be met with suspicion, discrimination or worse. Places where your right to practice your faith is about as respected as a vegetarian at a sausage fest. So buckle up, folks, because we're about to embark on a whirlwind tour of intolerance, where the only thing more consistent than the human capacity for compassion is, sadly, our capacity to completely cock it up. Over the next few chapters, we'll be shining a light on some of the worst offenders, the countries that seem hell-bent on earning a failing grade in the subject of Religious Tolerance 101. We'll be looking at their laws, their policies, and frankly their attitudes, because when it comes to making certain groups feel unwelcome, sometimes actions speak louder than words. And trust me, some of these countries are practically screaming. First up on our delightful world tour of bigotry is Myanmar, a country that's about as welcoming to Rohingya Muslims as a beehive is to a man wearing a bee costume made of raw meat. For years, the Rohingya, a Muslim minority group in Myanmar, have been subjected to a level of persecution that would make even the most jaded dictator blush. We're talking systematic discrimination, violence so brutal it'd make a warlord wince, and a refugee crisis so severe it would make a toddler with a leaky juice box look like a model of restraint. The Myanmar government, in its infinite wisdom, has decided that the best way to deal with a minority group is to pretend they don't exist. And by pretend they don't exist, I mean strip them of their citizenship, herd them into camps, and generally treat them with the same level of respect usually reserved for a mouldy loaf of bread. Now, you might think that such blatant human rights abuses would be met with swift and decisive action from the international community. And you would be adorable for thinking that. Sure, there have been strongly worded letters, concerned frowns from diplomats who probably flew over the refugee camps on their way to a 5-star resort, and the occasional hashtag campaign. But let's be honest, the international community's response to the Rohingya crisis has been about as effective as a screen door on a submarine. The result? The Rohingya remain trapped in a horrifying limbo, caught between a government that wants them gone and a world that seems content to watch it happen. It's a situation so bleak, it would make a mime shed a single perfect tear. Next stop on our tour of religious intolerance is a country that makes George Orwell's 1984 look like a heartwarming tale of friendship and understanding. China. Now, China has a long and storied history of, shall we say, cultural sensitivity. They're like that friend who borrows your clothes without asking, eats all your food, and then has the audacity to complain about your taste in music. But even by their standards, what's happening in Xinjiang province is next level messed up. We're talking about the systematic repression of the Uyghur people, a Muslim minority group who have the misfortune of living in an area that China really wants to control. And how is China going about this? Well, imagine if you took every dystopian sci-fi movie ever made, threw them in a blender with a dash of cultural genocide, and hit puree. That's Xinjiang in a nutshell. We're talking facial recognition software that can identify a Uyghur from a mile away, a vast network of surveillance cameras that would make even the NSA blush, and re-education camps that are about as educational as a prison sentence. These camps, which China insists are just vocational training centers, are essentially concentration camps where Uyghurs are forced to renounce their faith, pledge allegiance to the Communist Party, and perfect the art of looking terrified at all times. It's the kind of thing that would make Stalin say, "Okay, that's a bit much, even for me." Now you might think India, but they have a massive Muslim population. And you wouldn't be wrong, it's one of the largest in the world actually, with over 200 million Muslims. But here's the thing about numbers, they don't tell the whole story. It's like looking at a packed stadium and saying, wow, everyone here must be having a great time just because it's full. See, India's been grappling with this surge in religious tensions and frankly, it's gotten ugly. We're talking discriminatory laws like the Citizenship Amendment Act or CAA, which many see as explicitly anti-Muslim. It's like having a welcome to the neighbourhood potluck, but then slipping in a clause that says, unless you're from a specific religious group, then you can just politely leave your casserole and go. And it's not just the laws themselves, it's the ripple effect they create. The CAA, for example, has been accused of fueling a climate of fear and marginalisation among Indian Muslims. Imagine constantly feeling like you have to prove your belonging in your own country. That's the reality for many. It's like being stuck in a really long, awkward family reunion where some relatives keep questioning if you're actually related, even though you brought the potato salad, just like you always do. Ah, France, the land of romance, baguettes, and a really complicated relationship with religion. Look, we all know France loves its liberté, its égalité, its fraternité. It's basically the national motto, like live, laugh, love, but with fewer throw pillows. But when it comes to Islam, things get more complicated. France has this deeply ingrained principle of laïcité, which is basically secularism on steroids. They're so committed to separating church and state, it's like they built a wall between the two, higher than that Eiffel Tower everyone's so fond of. Now, on the surface, secularism sounds pretty good, right? No one wants religion meddling in their government, but in France, it's often interpreted in a way that feels more like freedom from religion rather than freedom of religion. Sri Lanka. Just the name conjures up images of pristine beaches, lush tea plantations, maybe a serene Buddha statue or two. It's the kind of place you see on postcards promising relaxation and tranquility. But for Sri Lankan Muslims, the reality has been anything but peaceful. See, ever since the horrific Easter bombings in 2019, which targeted churches and hotels, the country has been on edge. And understandably so. Those attacks were horrific, a gut punch to a nation known for its warmth and hospitality. But here's the thing about fear. It can make people do irrational things. And in Sri Lanka, that fear has manifested in increased scrutiny and suspicion directed towards the Muslim community. It's like when you lose your keys and you start frantically searching everywhere, even looking in places you know they can't be. The panic takes over. Denmark, a country often lauded for its social progressiveness, seems to have a bit of a blind spot when it comes to its Muslim population. You see, Denmark, much like that friend who claims to be colorblind, seems to have adopted a religion-blind approach, which sounds lovely in theory, like saying you only see the cookie, not the calories, but as we all know, ignoring a problem doesn't make it magically disappear. It just means you're choosing not to see it. The reality is, Denmark has introduced some policies that, while claiming to promote integration, feel a bit like a backhanded compliment. It's like telling someone they have a great personality after insulting their haircut. One of the policies that has raised eyebrows is the restriction on building mosques. Now, I'm no architect, but it seems a tad counterintuitive to promote integration while making it harder for a particular group to practice their faith. It's like saying, we want you to be part of our society, but please don't do that thing that makes you, well, you. And then there's the integration requirements, which on the surface seem reasonable enough. Who wouldn't want people to learn the language and customs of their new home? But some of these requirements seem oddly specific, like a very pointed game of charades where everyone's just trying to guess what the Danish government is really trying to say. Section 2, the integration conundrum. Switzerland. Land of delicious chocolate, intricate clockwork, and apparently a deeply ingrained fear of tall, pointy buildings. Now, I'm not talking about the Alps. Though those are pretty imposing too. I'm talking about minarets, the towers on mosques from which the call to prayer is traditionally made. You see, in 2009, the Swiss decided to hold a referendum on whether or not to ban the construction of new minarets. Now you might think, a referendum? That sounds very democratic, very Swiss. And you'd be right, except for the part where the referendum passed. That's right, the Swiss, famous for their neutrality, decided to be decidedly not neutral when it came to Islamic architecture. It's a bit like saying we're neutral on everything except for clocks. No more new clocks in Switzerland. Now let's hop on over to Central Europe, where we find the Czech Republic and Slovakia. Two countries that used to be one country until they decided, you know what, we're better off apart. And honestly, who can blame them? Breaking up is hard to do, but sometimes it's for the best. However, it seems that while they were busy dividing up the furniture and arguing over who got to keep the good china, they both seemed to hold on to a shared sentiment suspicion towards Muslims. Now, this isn't to say that everyone in the Czech Republic and Slovakia is anti-Muslim. That would be a gross oversimplification. But there's no denying that there's a certain level of distrust, a fear of the other, that permeates certain levels of society and unfortunately seeps into the political discourse. Look, it's easy to get disheartened when you see the kind of discrimination and prejudice that Muslims face in certain parts of the world. From the crowded camps in Myanmar to the so-called neutrality of Switzerland, it's enough to make you want to throw up your hands and say, well, that's just the way it is. But here's the thing, it doesn't have to be this way. Discrimination, no matter who it's directed at, is a problem we can tackle. It might seem like an uphill battle, but remember, every journey starts with a single step, or in this case, a single voice speaking out against injustice. If you found this video even remotely insightful, even if it made you clench your fists in righteous anger, do us a favor and share it. Talk about it with your friends, your family, that weird neighbor who always seems to be wearing a bathrobe. Because awareness is the first step towards change. And hey, while you're at it, why not hit that subscribe button? We'll be here next week with more deep dives into the issues that matter. Until then, stay informed, stay engaged, and most importantly, stay furious. Because the world needs more people who give a damn. And as always, thanks for watching.